This is Live Well Talk on being a caregiver of a loved one with cancer. I'm Dr. Dustin Arnold, Chief Medical Officer at Union Point Health, St. Luke's Hospital. A cancer diagnosis not only affects the patient, but also the loved ones. And today joining me to discuss the burden and the perhaps labor of love that can occur is Adrienne Douglas, whose husband had colon cancer at a young age. We'll talk about that. And joining me also is Nancy Yeisley, a longtime associate of the hospital and works over at the Cancer Center. Adrienne, you're tell us about your husband, Zach.
So my husband, Zach, was diagnosed at 39 with stage 4 colon cancer. After months of being denied colonoscopies because he was too young. Only in your 30s, they were like, no, like, these are symptoms of, like, maybe like a hemorrhoid or, like,
right,
like a food allergy even. And so we ended up having to switch practitioners because Zach was in a lot of pain. And he was like, something's not right. So we ended up finding a practitioner that finally sent him to a GI. And that GI said, let's do a CAT scan. And that CAT scan was what showed that he had stage 4 colon cancer. And so, basically, we fought colon cancer for 2.5 years. And unfortunately, he passed away last April. But
I don't know how to say this. I mean, from a society standpoint, we don't do as good as we used to taking care of loved ones because it's hard, and 2-income families, and it's, you don't take grandma that's had a stroke and just move her in with you. Like that happened like when I was a little kid, right? That's changed. I mean, it really has. So, I can think of all the logistical burdens that it must be to care for a loved one, but I also imagine it is a labor of love to some degree.
Yeah.
And what did you learn about yourself along the way?
I learned I had a lot more patience than I thought that I did. And I think I definitely learned how to deal with handling trauma as it comes. Like there'd be days where my husband had an allergic reaction to chemotherapy. Like, all right, let's go to the ER. Or, he's not feeling very well. It's like, okay, I'll take the day off from work. I'll help you out there. And so definitely learned that I was stronger than I thought that I was before. I was much more patient than I thought that I was. And if you love that person enough, it's all worth it.
So would Zach have expected you to care for him? Like, because my wife would probably just send me to hospice if I had a terminal illness. She doesn't listen to these podcasts, so I can say stuff like that. But kidding, of course. But what did you learn about Zach? What was the one thing you took away from this man you love that you learned about him?
He was just so strong. Like, I knew he was in a lot of pain. I knew he was tired, but he just kept so upbeat. He was so, like, transparent about, like, how he was feeling, but still managed to be the light of the room and just keep his head up for everybody. And I think that affected everybody around him, like from his caregivers like me, as well as his medical caregivers, like those at Physicians Clinic of Iowa. He was definitely an inspiration and very strong.
Well, I think I think you're an inspiration and very strong as well.
Oh,
I mean, that's
you.
pretty easy, obvious to tell. Now, Nancy, you're was that Jerry Lewis telethon, "You'll Never Walk Alone," or what? Do you remember that? What was the song? The song you would sing?
Yes, I know what.
And if I knew it, I would start singing it right now and go into my next question. But they're not alone. There's services at the Helen G. Nassif Community Cancer Center. Can you tell us about those?
Well, it starts with when somebody comes to their very first oncology appointment. For my role as a social worker, is very first appointment with the medical oncologist. I
just want to interrupt right there, Nancy. You're a problem solver. I've known you a long time, and you solve problems. I mean, you might be a licensed social worker, but you get things done.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So we right away. I said, met Zach and Adrienne, and that's a hard day. And I remember how sick Zach was coming in that day. Mm-hmm. He was a sick sick guy, and talking about getting a workup and getting treatment started as soon as we could in that for him, and how overwhelming for patients and their families. One of the first things I do when I introduce myself, I'm here for extra support for the patient and family. We
Right.
obviously want to provide great medical care, but we also want to make sure we're thinking about what you need as people. What can we do to walk alongside you each step of the way, and help make a difference?
And I was
So equally for patients and families. And I think then too, like with caregivers, it's not just the patient, It's interesting you talked about a labor of love on Adrienne's part. You could see the love in the room between Zach and Adrienne. I mean, both of them. I mean, you just were like, okay, how can we help these two people? It wasn't about helping Zach or Adrienne because they're together in this, and how to help the two of them wherever that journey led.
it is, I mean, it is rewarding when you have great people, great patients you're taking care of that are appreciative, and you really do form a connection. That's what
Yeah.
keeps everybody coming back to this building and their clinics every day. But are there some other specific programs perhaps that the Cancer Center has to help with individuals
Yeah.
and their families?
So yes, absolutely. So we do some things to kind of pair people together in a buddy system when needed, helping connect, patients and caregivers. That became harder during COVID. Of course, we had to get a little bit more creative, but we also have specifically, and we've just restarted those since COVID now, caregiver retreats that we do a couple times a year in conjunction with palliative care and with out at Prairie Woods. And we've got one coming up end of April again. But also, meeting with a guy like Zach, he'll say, I'm just as worried about my wife, as I am about me. So I'll often meet just separately with a family caregiver as well in that.
I not only just with doing these podcasts and talking about issues like this, but we're being in practice for 20 some odd years. People, the not being alone is the key, I think, to a lot of this. What is the most, the most brutal punishment you can give someone in the penal system is solitary confinement. Solitary confinement. That's the highest that's the highest punishment. And you see support groups, and I really think it's just really comes down to that there's this innate human feeling not to be alone, to know that there are other people that are sharing with that. Adrienne, did you find any benefit from any sort of support group outside of the Cancer Center with other cancer families?
Yeah, actually, I think one of the biggest supports was finding social media groups. I was 25 when Zach was diagnosed, and so there weren't a lot of younger caregivers out there. And so being able to find people around the world in different states as well, just, who shared my story, that I was able to, message and say, are you feeling this way too? Am I crazy? Am I being dramatic? And, they can reply with, no, you're totally fine, and vice versa. So even though if you don't find anybody in like your immediate community, there's definitely people out there in the world.
That's outstanding. Yeah, social media has changed the World Wide Web. It has certainly changed that a lot. So, Adrienne, I think part of your legacy, or Zach's legacy, is getting the word out that early screening is important, particularly if there's symptoms. I mean, that that's even a little bit different. I mean, if you have symptoms, you got to check, right?
Yeah.
Now, would he qualify just to be screened sooner? Like, was there someone in the family that had family history?
No.
Okay.
Unfortunately not.
So it really came down to the symptoms.
Yeah. But now, since he had colorectal cancer, like his siblings were able to get screened pretty easily. But
right.
Yeah.
Because they have first degree relatives. Okay. I think that, to me, the take home here is with Zach is that common things can happen at unusually young ages. Just like a 25-year-old or 30-year-old can present with a childhood illness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because they're 25 doesn't mean that it's not chickenpox. Doesn't mean that it's not congenital heart disease. Likewise, I think you have to approach this that just because they're 39, correct?
Yeah.
Jack was 39, doesn't mean that he can't have something that typically older people get. It's a tough lesson to learn for a physician too when you have a patient like that, and you constantly have to be thinking about it. So through this journey, you learned a lot about yourself. What's some advice you can give other listeners that are going through this same process? That at this point they might feel they're alone. What advice do you give them?
I would definitely say, it sounds really cliche, but take care of yourself. You cannot take care of somebody else if you are not taking care of yourself. I unfortunately made that mistake. I got severe caregiver burnout, but eventually I learned to ask for help, to say, hey, I need to take a few hours to myself. Somebody drive my husband to chemotherapy today, or can somebody just, it sounds like I'm babysitting him. Somebody watch my husband while I run to Target and blow off some steam. So definitely take care of yourself, even if it's 5 minutes a day. Take that time. Also reach out, like I said, social media, or just finding a community around you. Find someone to talk to that shares your experiences, because feeling alone can be a really, really big burden, and it makes you kind of spiral even more. So, and also we were able to ask Nancy for resources as well, like with relationship problems or financial issues or just general questions. Your social worker is always there for you, especially our problem solver, Nancy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such good affirmation to take care of yourself. Sometimes in healthcare, and other people use this analogy outside healthcare, put the oxygen mask on you first in the airplane, then the person that you're caring for next to you. Yeah. And I think that cliche or metaphor for caregivers is important advice. Wouldn't you say, Nancy, in your experience?
Yeah, and it's hard because your instinct is to I want to be the one to take care of him. I want to be there with him. I'm his wife. I'm what I want to be there. But the idea, or feeling like, how can I worry about how much sleep I'm getting if he's going through all this? But you realize then that, wait a minute, I won't be able to keep taking care of him if I don't.
Right. Sometimes we have that talk with
yeah.
families where they have an extended hospitalization and the loved one wants to be there the whole time, which we encourage.
Yeah.
For patient advocacy and for continuity and et cetera. But you also have to say, you need to take care of yourself, because when we're done with them, you're the one that is going to pick up the torch, so to speak.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That is outstanding advice. So take care of yourself and get an early colonoscopy if needed. Those are two things you can tell us.
Yeah.
And that Nancy's a problem solver.
And Nancy's a wonderful problem solver.
Isn't she, though? Yes. Nancy, the Cancer Center, who's eligible for these services from your team at the Nassif Community Cancer Center?
So as the Community Cancer Center, we serve anybody in the community, wherever they're receiving their health care, whether they're receiving their health care even here locally or, in a different community. You live in this community, you're people we serve. And so our caregiver resources, for instance, are available for everybody. And we have people, calling for either that one-on-one support, helping connect people with other caregivers, or things like the caregiver retreat. So we very much pride ourselves on being just that, a resource for the community.
Outstanding. It is. I'm always, and I've said this in other podcasts, I'm always so proud of the enthusiasm and the joy that the Cancer Center staff has for their work. I mean, it's not a happy business. People have cancer, but every time we have a team member over for a podcast, it's always, I take some inspiration from it.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Nancy, Adrienne, thank you for joining me and sharing with our listeners about these valuable resources and some proven wisdom that I think you shared with us today, Adrienne. Once again, this is Nancy Yeisley, oncology social worker at Nassif Community Cancer Center, and Adrienne Douglas, who worked closely with Nancy while serving as caregiver for her husband, Zach. To learn more about the resources available to cancer patients and caregivers at the Nassif Community Cancer Center, call 319-558-4876 or visit communitycancercenter.org. Thank you for listening to Live Well Talk On. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your family, friends, neighbors, strangers about our podcast. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, or wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, be well.